couple of other notes on this ISIS situation. We've just had Biden, and this is really hard to interpret. Biden opens his yap. Well, we know that Biden has a big yap and a mind like a rag bag. So Biden opens his yap on a trip to Cambridge, Massachusetts, I think. And he starts saying, look, our biggest problem in the Middle East are our allies. And he says, essentially, Turkey and the Saudis, Turkey and the Gulf states are funding these terrorists, and they should stop. So it means Turkey, clearly, Gulf Cooperation Council, mainly Saudi, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, the wonderful gratitude of Kuwait for being reinstalled in power. See how far that gets you. And then he says, moderate opposition. Why, says Joe, Lunch Bucket Joe says, there is no moderate opposition in Syria. There is no moderate opposition. And I think this is a very important point. There is a moderate opposition, and it's where you'd expect a moderate opposition to be, in the parliament, running for office, contesting elections. The moderate opposition is not an armed terrorist killer opposition. It's peaceful. I met some of these people when I was received by the governor of Homs in November of 2011. I met with he had a bunch of people there. He had all of the religious leaders, Christians included, but he had one or two westernized women who could have been at home in Paris as well as in Homs, and another guy, very interesting, a Marxist. He was actually a Marxist poet. And the Marxist poet said, Assad is too soft. He should crack down more. And the fashionable women were saying, we just want to be able to organize politically, have our own political party, and so forth. That's the moderate opposition. And they've been essentially back with Assad from about April or May or whatever it was of 2011. The people who are armed are all terrorists. The armed opposition is ipso facto the terrorist opposition. Let's get that all clear. So Biden is right. And of course, I guess based on this, we'll have to stop the plan to spend $500 million on the moderate terrorist opposition. And of course, even without that, there's going to be a grave difficulty in finding moderate terrorist opposition figures who can be actually vetted moderates. They have to be. That's going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard to find. So the other question, the people that McCain is right? McCain knows his terrorists. McCain had said to Kerry 10 days ago, John, I know too many of them, terrorists, right? Free Syrian Army, Nusra, ISIS. I know too many of them, said McCain. They'll never do what you want. They'll never stop fighting Assad to focus on ISIS. And indeed, that turns out to be an understatement. The various so-called moderate terrorist opposition groups in Syria are turning against the U.S. They say, this is no good. We don't want to bomb ISIS. They say, we have no quarrel with ISIS and the caliph. We don't care about that. Beheadings, we don't care. What we want to do is fight Assad. Obviously, they want the spoils, don't they? So the people that the U.S. proposes to arm are saying they're not going to turn these weapons against ISIS. They're gonna focus on Assad. So there is no moderate middle in Syria. It's gone since about February, March of 2011, since McCain and the International Republican Institute. This is very important. One of the two wings of Project Democracy, in other words, the National Endowment of Democracy, which organizes coups and destabilizations and putsches around the world under democratic camouflage. One of the two wings is the International Republican Institute, chairman of the board, John McCain. Okay? So that's a whole mechanism for destabilization. And you'll remember that some of the destabilizers, the meddlers of the U.S. who were arrested in Egypt, one of them was this kid LaHood, son of the Republican congressman and later Obama cabinet official Ray LaHood. So the young LaHood had gone back to the Republican gravy train, and he was building his resume by destabilizing Egypt. That's the International Republican Institute, right? They organize coups. There's a Democratic Party version. I think that's the one that the former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was a part of. Now, Turkey. The Turkish parliament now says, okay to intervene. You're allowed to intervene, Erdogan, but this does not mean that Erdogan will intervene, or Erdogan may intervene in such a way as to attack Assad, to provide a safe haven for terrorists. Right? There is now this fight going on at the city of Kobane. It's in Syria. It's right near the Turkish border, a mile away. It would be very easy for the Turkish government to close the border. That's the big demand. Close your blankety blank border to those terrorists, and their logistics will be cut off. Array your army massively on your own side of the border. No, this is a competing plan for a caliphate, right? If you say new Ottoman Empire, my God, the Ottoman emperor, up until about, 1920, was the caliph. So Erdogan says, what? Caliph Ibrahim? You must be crazy. Everybody knows that Erdogan is the new name for the caliph. Well, sorry. People in Turkey need to think now. If they expect the United States to come and help them in case of aggression, and they can't even close their border, I think even in the arid and imbecilic lands of mainstream media, this is going to be too much, and we've even seen that in the Congress. And we're also, how about this? According to Press TV, ISIS, the Islamic State, has representatives of Caliph Ibrahim, McCain's friend. They have now opened a consulate in Ankara, Turkey. And if you want to get a visa to go to the ISIS-controlled parts of Syria and or Iraq, you can go to the consulate there and get that visa, I'm sure, for a very hefty fee. Now, how does this, let's see, that's what your friends are doing to you. Now, your so-called enemies, right? Let's take Syria. Moallem, always a monument of dignity, the Syrian foreign minister at the UN, laying out the position, dignified, calm. And later in the press interviews, he said he urges the United States and other countries to bomb all the terrorists in Syria. He's happy to see the U.S. bombing them. And he says, why don't you give up on your dualism by virtue of which you are willing to bomb some terrorists and help some others, or maybe even bomb at one time and help at another time the same terrorists. That can be. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is indeed Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on the 3rd of October. Now, concerning this Lamborn sedition, the Lamborn sedition has been repudiated by Lamborn. As soon as that stuff got out on the internet and he began to feel the proverbial blowtorch of public opinion, he said, oh, no, I didn't mean that at all. Yeah, that's sedition, Congressman. You better back off from that. And how about those other guys, the some of us that you talked about? Does that mean that you're stopping with sedition and they're continuing? And then Crystal, once again, gives out the phone number. Call me at the Weekly Standard, and we'll make you into the new Snowden. But wait a minute, Crystal, aren't you supposed to be against the Snowden caper, the limited hangout? Now, let's try to do as much as we can here on the Secret Service. Now, remember, a lot of these stupid broadcasts assume there was a time when the Secret Service had a great reputation. That's not in my lifetime. Franklin D. Roosevelt assassination. The Russian woman painter and her assistant were in the room. They were allowed to flee the scene. No checks, no investigation, no chemical analysis of her paint box, and they fled with Lucy Rutherford, the mistress of Roosevelt. You wouldn't know about the details, though, if you'd listened to Ken Burns. JFK assassination, nobody can forget that famous film where the 4 Secret Service men are on the 4 corners of the car. Supervisor tells them to get down. They protest. One guy gesticulates. He's so angry. And within minutes, Kennedy has been shot. Was that supervisor ever put on trial? RFK assassination. He had Secret Service protection by that point. George Wallace, another one. With Ford, the most interesting ones are the ones where you can see what the goal is. Nelson Rockefeller, CIA pillar, CIIA, right? Inter-American Affairs, Latin American subversion. All right, so he's going to be the beneficiary. So with poor Gerald Ford, we get not one but 2. Sarah Jane Moore, Lynette Squeaky Fromm to get Nelson Rockefeller into the presidency. Could anything be more obvious? And in the case of Ronald Reagan, poor guy, he chose George Bush the Elder, so therefore he gets Hinckley, who was on the watch lists, and so forth. Now, basic ideas. The oligarchy wants to promote chaos because that's a great medium. Then within that, they can run specific actions. Somebody like Obama comes in eager to serve the banks and the oligarchy. The presidency and the dynamics of the nation state kind of take over and blunt some of these things so that Obama today is not what he was. And, of course, in the meantime, CIA puppet model 2008 has now been outdistanced in evil by 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, 12 was Romney, of course, and others. Okay? I once saw an interesting cartoon. It was a gorilla. This was Chile, but it could have been something else. The gorilla with a machine gun. It said CIA puppet model 1974, and a saw blade was reaching up through the floor to cut a circle around him, and that one said CIA 1976. So you get the idea. First term, oligarchy controls president by need of money to run for office. Second term by scandals. But then within that, it's punctuated by this constant sniping, quite literally. Couple of examples. November 2009, the Salahis crash the reception. Couple of weeks after that, Obama's West Point speech, first week of December. He gives them the Afghan surge, but he also has a date for a pullout. So they're happy about the surge, but they don't like the pullout. December 2009, Mutalab in the skies over Detroit. And you'll remember, let's see if we can find it. Look at this is all on tarpley.net in quite a bit of detail. You'll remember that on the evening of January 4th, right, about 2 weeks later, along comes Richard Wolff on MSNBC, and the word is that the Obama White House became very suspicious that this had been deliberate, that Mutalab was allowed on there deliberately in order to embarrass Obama. 2010, I'm not finding a whole lot, but we're going to try to fill that in. 2011, the Arab Spring, kicked off by Walnuts McCain in Cairo. March 2011, Obama okays the Libya bombing. Okay. Parenthetically, if Gaddafi had attacked Benghazi and killed the rebels in Benghazi, there would have been no Syrian civil war, no ISIS, no destabilization of Iraq. Would have been smarter to let Gaddafi go in there and mop up those crazies. And the fashionable women were saying, we just want to be able to organize politically, have our own political party, and so forth. That's the moderate opposition. And they've been essentially back with Assad from about April or May or whatever it was of 2011. The people who are armed are all terrorists. The armed opposition is ipso facto the terrorist opposition. Let's get that all clear. So Biden is right, and of course, a couple of other notes on this ISIS situation. We've just had Biden, and this is really hard to interpret. Biden opens his yap. Well, we know that Biden has a big yap and a mind like a rag bag. So Biden opens his yap on a trip to Cambridge, Massachusetts, I think. And he starts saying, look, our biggest problem in the Middle East are our allies. And he says, essentially, Turkey and the Saudis, Turkey and the Gulf states are funding these terrorists, and they should stop. So it means Turkey, clearly, Gulf Cooperation Council, mainly Saudi, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, the wonderful gratitude of Kuwait for being reinstalled in power. See how far that gets you. And then he says, moderate opposition. Why, says Joe, Lunch Bucket Joe says, there is no moderate opposition. When I was received by the governor of Homs in November of 2011, I met with he had a bunch of people there. He had all of the religious leaders, Christians included, but he had one or two westernized women who could have been at home in Paris as well as in Homs. And another guy, very interesting, a Marxist. He was actually a Marxist poet. And the Marxist poet said, Assad is too soft. He should crack down more. Syria. There is no moderate opposition. And I think this is a very important point. There is a moderate opposition, and it's where you'd expect a moderate opposition to be, in the parliament, running for office, contesting elections. The moderate opposition is not an armed terrorist killer opposition. It's peaceful. I met some of these people.